E comerciais, a partir dessa diversidade, é uma grande aliada a este desenvolvimento sustentável que buscamos. Por isso, te convido a participar do Fórum de Inovação e Investimentos na Bioeconomia Amazônica. Queremos trazer novas vozes para este debate, conhecer diferentes experiências e olhares sobre este mercado e encontrar sinergias e caminhos para uma Amazônia mais próspera e resiliente. São conversas para todo mundo. Para quem procura investimento, para quem procura opções para investir, para quem propõe políticas públicas e todos e todas que queiram entender mais sobre bioeconomia na Amazônia. Vamos lá?
Let's go. Welcome everyone to our third panel in the second day of the Bioeconomy Amazon Investment Innovation Forum. This panel has the provocation to discuss what are the challenges, the examples, what we can learn with what is being done in the Panama Amazon. Many times we don't know what's happening in the neighbor countries, and we thought it was interesting to bring to this panel an initial debate with our neighbors from Panama Amazon. In this panel, we have as panelists Miguel Tang, and among many other experiences, he is from the Amazon and he was born and he knows deeply the Amazon forest. He has lived there for a long time and he's going to tell us this story. And we invited him for the project Gastronomy and Conservation that will show all the potentiality of the Amazon in the Peruvian gastronomy. We also invited Lucía, who is with a vast experience in the public sector, and her last experience was a vice minister in the of environment in Peru, and she's going to bring to us a discussion about the effective policies in the context of strengthening the bioeconomy. And we have two commentators with the purpose to provoke us, not only those who are here, but those who are following us through chats, reacting and sending questions. We have Rafael Anta. He's the main expert in science and technology and innovation of the Inter-American Development Bank. And he leads an interesting initiative that is the construction and strengthening of a network of bioeconomy in Latin America, thinking about public policies. And we also have as commentator Adriana Moreira, also with a vast experience in Amazon. For us Brazilians, she was director of ARPA, the Sustainable Landscapes in the Amazon, and now she coordinates a global program of conservation. So we have an interesting panel with Amazon perspectives, our continent perspective. We have a lot to learn. We are going to start now with the presentation of Miguel Tang. Miguel, welcome, and I thank you for accepting the invitation to participate here. You are on mute, Miguel. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tatiana, for the introduction. I want to thank the organization. Good morning, everyone, and all the participants. My name is Miguel Tang, and with 4 years old, I had the first opportunity to travel in the forest with my father, and I asked him, Dad, what do I need to take to eat? And my dad said, okay, ask your mother. And my mother took me to the market and he bought some things and basically processed food and some sodas. And I took a heavy backpack and I started walking in the forest, and my dad was only taking a knife and he started eating everything. And I was wonderful. I was amazed, and that was my first experience. And I also traveled many times later, but I didn't take the backpack anymore. Now I only took a knife and I could eat with everything that the forest would offer. The fishing, the fruits, the diversity of food. In this reflection, you say, okay, why are we killing the forest in order to produce food? Why are we transforming this forest in cultivation and culture? Thinking about a market, and these came studying biology, and I studied biology in college, and then I went to the business school. Especially these inputs have a limited market in the production zones in the Amazon cities. In the case of Peru, there is a huge population, and we cannot be transported to with these products. In 2006, with the growth of the diversity in Peru, with an icon that proposed the biodiversity, first in the beach and then in the mountains, the same global demands of the so we need to have the same conditions. Peru is a diverse country, and the diversity of the coast was already packed in the gastronomy circuit. We knew that there were more than 2,000 varieties of potatoes, and what we saw is that 25% of the Peruvian people and took a long time to discover that. So in the new explorations that the cook was going to meet and in very important meetings, if somehow they have the proposal to preserve the public. So we are going to learn the techniques from the Amazon culinary, and there are many very basic, not very diverse, but in order to put this input in the high gastronomy, in the culinary technique that everyone develops. From the construction of productive chains that allows the proper storage and the proper processing, so this product can arrive fresh and good quality, a natural quality that these products have. From this encounter of the potentiality of the gastronomy, we can articulate the markets of the coastline of Peru with more than 450 Amazon products from many different ecosystems in the forests. And that generated an interesting economy for the communities, but also allowed us to attract the gastronomy tourism for these communities and a good cultural exchange between both sides. In one side, the knowledge of the future natives, the indigenous communities, the Amazon populations about the use of many resources, not only for a basic eating habit, but products that are good for our health. But this new biodiversity needed to enter in the relations. The cook was teaching the communities on how to treat a product and how to diversify the culinary proposal. Something very interesting that we saw in the Amazon is that the locals were upset eating fish in the 3 or 4 ways that they prepared the fish, but they were tired of it, always using water to cook very basically, but they didn't have the habit to eat the fresh products in their natural state. So when a cook gives their knowledge to the people, they start to see an interesting change in the dynamics of the eating. Because there is a key food here is that why the communities are selling the fish and the fishing products that they can get from the nature, and with this money, with this sale, they are buying fish preserved. It didn't seem logic at all. So we are selling we are selling manioc and buying bread. So it's very interesting to see that. The women used to say it's because we get tired of it. We want to try new things. So that's why this meeting with the cooks were very interesting, because from these products, they can diversify because they learn different dishes and they learn about food safety, and they don't depend on money to have healthy populations and good well-fed populations. We saw this with the COVID. Many communities came across with the isolation, and they resort to what they always had, this wonderful pantry that a forest, a standing and healthy forest has, with a lot of biomass, a lot of biodiversity, and with these dynamics that yes, it is possible to support the population from the standing forest. And that made us reflect on the role that the economic dynamics have. These communities have interesting economic activities because they are not developed. They need to do this in a record as they find new resilience that the forests have to limitless initiatives. So we have to keep this in the level. So I think the challenge, the important challenge of these entrepreneurs is one, having the capacity to work side by side with scientists, universities, businessmen, and how to strengthen the human capacity, the human capital to go from one subsistence economy to a handicraft economy or a small scale in order to dynamize these wonderful resources with a lot of potential. The other part is how to connect these products with pre-primary process. For example, we developed the Arapama ham with an ancestor technique of conservation. These products are very well made. Once they generated, we don't depend on electric energy in these industrial chains, and they can generate jobs for men, for women, and young children that they can develop through the transformation of these products, modifying, specializing, and having more beliefs in these new processes. There are a lot of new opportunities that take place from these elements. So another very important thing to develop this scale economy is the commercial culture that has to be developed. This business culture that needs to be developed in the Amazon capitals, in the Amazon cities, so the entrepreneurs can translate this knowledge and generate good business models based on the daily productions of gastronomy. Gastronomy is a good source for that because it's not only about food. The high cuisine has culture, knowledge, has flowers and green leaves and seeds. It's very beautiful from these. They want to generate tourism and development in these communities.
Thank you, Miguel. This is fantastic. I think the experience you bring of potential of development of the production chains, of the networks in gastronomy, it's very important. Lucia, I give you the floor, and we're here expecting to have some understanding about Peru. Your mic is off. Thank you. This is a challenge to speak after Miguel and his wide experience. As you've seen, there's a lot of potential for this knowledge. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you for the organization. And specifically to the fact that this already reflects what we are speaking. This network that puts together this wheel and this consortium, the state, the society, the academia, together to look for solutions. I like that you want to know about Peru because we're neighbors, but we are very far away. We coincide in a lot of things, but specifically the case of Peru right now, we have been working a long time and there is a depth. We are rediscovering in the 20th and 21st century the Amazon, the cultures, the potentials to look at it as the standing forest, the Amazon products and services can maintain and be used in a sustainable way. And it's not a reflection of what we do in the coast, which is mainly monocultures. This discovery led us to realize that the Amazon should be measured in a multidimensional way, focused on territory, and the interventions should be territorial as well, but should be measured multi-sectorially, a lot of sectors working in the same territory, and each of them doing their part, and should be understood as a multi-level intervention from the state. We're talking about local, state, and regional governments. And instead of doing something propositional, it ends up creating negative aspects. And multi-actors as well, they have a key role here that the originary populations are expecting from actors and landowners and public sector, in general, academia. This is the first challenge. When we have what we call legal Amazon, eco businesses, all this chain of values that can potentialize our work here. This multidimensional look made us recognize something that Miguel mentioned, that there are aspects that should be considered step by step. There are still a lot of gaps to be covered about capacities. We can think that from overnight, a native community, as we legally say in Peru, with a great product can start to export if they don't have scientific support of what's going to be done, or even knowledge of businesses. This is what we try to do to dimension what will be subsistence, what happens in a lot of communities, small, medium, and large communities of productions. What is the theme of these conversations about the private sector? We have had strong presence of this sector in Peru. For example, as Miguel mentioned, from the bottom up, the knowledge of the wealth of our surrounding that makes us connect to this national pride that is gastronomy and what the market has become. The best chefs in the country are focusing and to widen this market that was local to be regional and national. So I'll use the same examples, I'm sorry. But what's happening is that the private companies are also looking at the Amazon. But we're not all seeing that. Talking about Natura, we're talking about a great scale here, great company. It's more than Brazil. We have three sustainability pillars. They're proud to be a green company. What we have in Peru. This a Peruvian company is born from a little families group from the Andes region, and they are selling beverages in a worldwide level, and they are sponsoring Barcelona. So this great chain promoted by nature and by sustainable Amazon. When we have international example, we have Natura as an example, and AHA, it's a local business that started producing beverage that is from protected areas and made by these communities that live in these protected areas. So this is a multidimensional look on how we have to do things and recognizing that each situation should have solutions from subsistence and in all levels of scales, that we need innovation, we need technology, information, and recognition and ancestral knowledges that maybe sometimes are not adequately valued. This all with public policy bias or incentives sometimes that are necessary from the state's point of view for it to have predictability for the investor in any of the scales. I like to make this differentiation in the levels of scale because we have very concrete examples of native Amazon communities as the Kenitoemi who are exporting cocoa paste and are developing innovation and are increasing their value chain when they start with the cocoa paste and end up with chocolate and worrying about the packaging and everything else. We should have more, but we only have this so far. And we need more support to that. And the key role of the state is not only an incentive for this value chains to be developed, but also so they can offer public services that allow these chains to be developed. When Miguel talked, he mentioned of the possibility of having aggregated value, and this is happening in the institution that he works in to have these ancestral knowledges and how we do these activities in places where we don't have access to energy, for an example. We're talking about power, basic needs like sewage, for example. It needs to be safe as well. And of course, education for any seed of knowledge of business to emerge, protected, embraced by public policies that not only direct financial incentive, but also about services. I'd like to mention that there are a lot of initiatives in a Peruvian government level that search for innovation in bio and eco businesses and are not only from ministries like the environment, but also of production and agriculture. This is very interesting for us to understand that we are in a way of building something better, but in no way it can be done without help. Not from the bottom up, without this support in all the levels of scales, but not only as well from this the government, but also from the civil society and academia and private sector, and respecting the people who live this daily life of these regions. Thank you for this first round, Tatiana. So now I invite our artist, Clara Daré, who is making this graphical systematization of what we are talking about. It's very important as a part of this forum to create visual elements, as you have seen our art and our artists, so we can work with these ideas. So Clara, you have the floor. Hello, good morning. Good morning, Tatiana. We're still here working on this system, but we have some of the current scenario in Latin America and some of the challenges that Miguel and Lucia brought us. It's important to mention that these panels will be available later on the website. Thank you, I love it. Going on, people who are watching us on YouTube and other channels, send us questions on the chat. So we'll try to have a lot of conversation for next phase. Going further, now we have our two commentators. Rafael Anta is the first one to make his comments and try to talk to us about his experience. Welcome, Rafael. Thank you, Tatiana. I will speak in Spanish so we can give continuity in language-wise. In the questions and answers part, we can do it in Portuguese. First, thank you for the invitation and congratulations for organizing this forum that proved to have this information flow to be very rich. And it's important for neighbor countries like Peru to share these challenges with us. It's very difficult to say something after Miguel and Lucia made such wonderful presentations. They talked about the issues that we can see from Peru. I'll try to talk about two issues here, and later I'll talk about the things that they said, two or three things just to emphasize, just to deepen this. When Tatiana introduced me, said that we have a Latin American network, but this is an idea that the only thing that we are expecting is for the knowledge to have a permanent flow. These economies are emerging very quickly, and the other countries who are further on this path, we want to see that if we can have this instruments and policies measured for those that worked, and if they worked, we can borrow them and also have the other countries in the region to share what they do and what is interesting, what works. And I believe that Peru is not in the group, but I will assure that they are in the group from tomorrow. First group of six, we will start with them, these countries that have this bioeconomy strategy. Costa Rica, Colombia, Ecuador still have these policies. Brazil, in the federal level in Brazil and in the state of Amazon, Argentina and Uruguay. And in this last group, we have Mexico and Guatemala. And from tomorrow, Peru is in.
With with this group of countries, what we have in terms is an agenda of knowledge where we will put together a list of 30 topics, and the members of the group will talk about this is a priority to one, it is not a priority to me. So we add the priorities and we ranked all the topics by priority, per priority. So what we are doing is every 3 weeks, and we have a virtual workshop, and we invite an expert or in this topic, and so they can talk about this topic for 1 hour or half an hour, and the group can ask questions and suggest new things and react on the speeches. If one of the members wants to invite anyone, they will always be welcome. So we have to discuss an important topic. It's interesting to see someone coming from the ministry, for example. So it's good to have a multidisciplinarity and a movement of many points that have to be connected. And the current actors of these ministries, the science of technology and culture, they are the providers of the biomass and the environment and climate change. They concern with biodiversity. So these teams are grouped in few categories that are institutional capacity and capacities to express these policies and execute them. And it's very important to say that they said local capacity in the level of department. But many of the decisions of these biological resources are taken in the regional level. We need to have local capacities in this level as well. Regulatory topics that if we want to do something, you cannot apply the regulations without this permission to do that. And also the talent and the bioeconomy in a discipline of economic development where we converge biology, biotechnology, and materials, digital technologies. So everyone can have talent to work together. And therefore, we need investments in science and technology and companies. All these topics are in these 5 categories. And with this, I close the first part, and I wanted to highlight some things. I want to highlight 3 things. I don't know if they're the 3 most spectacular one, because I think the case of Peru is wonderful to combine the economy with gastronomy, because gastronomy is an important economic hub in the country and can serve as a great tradition to exclude cultural values from the food and the offers and generate products that can be something that I saw in Brazil with Alexa Tala, and in Peru it's made by the I think that's one of the resources that are more agile and ambitious that the Amazon countries can have. I wanted to, as a starting point, this bioprospection. When I talk about bioprospection, I'm talking about the scientific capacity to discover in the nature species the new properties, proteins, molecules, enzymes, genes, and to choose this value because this value is going to tell us what this species made or is made of, or what is made for with chemical process and industrial process, petrochemicals. And so the bioprospection already exists in the region, but if we can call it a drama, because the bioprospection compared to the richness of biodiversity of the Amazon. So the bioprospection is a key factor, and we need to know what is the value. The second topic that I want to say is an opportunity to have open science. We took 2 or 3 decades for people to discover how to transform biomass in another thing, in a tissue or a fabric or a shoe or a beverage or oil and many other things. Many of these science is available with new resins of biological origin, the power to transform a biomass to a biological skin or a fabric made with fibers of pineapples. We need the knowledge to do that. That's why the bioprospection is important. We can convert this in other things. That this transformation has more available knowledge than in the region that anyone can make in any region. So how do you make a connection between the academic sector and the industry with the producers, and in order to produce other things that adds more value than the biomass? The last thing that I would like to say is that all this discussion of producing new business with biological resources is maybe the greatest opportunity to precise the forest and the biodiversity and to recover what is being lost. There is a case that I like to use that Lucía is talking about in Natura, and there is a Colombian company where the bioprospection discovers that the fruit of a tree that nobody knew what was for that tree, and we needed a company to start processing these fruits from this tree for the cosmetic industry. So this protects the species and generate local employment in many people that process this food first and generate a whole virtual cycle where the species is protected and it is recovered. And there are high level gains and everything works. Another point that I wanted to say that something nobody said is that when we talk about the shares, the head chefs that go to the forest, and Lucía also talked about putting the academic sector to work with teachers. I think the key word here is trust. Many times we don't have that trust when there is someone from the city, from a big city, the people who are in the rural area, they or doctors or some companies with a different sustainable view, they have a different look, and there is this distrust. So these are policies that need to be created to generate trust. When the chef arrives, there is uh, a distrust that an icon of the country that knows how that's not going to do anything because of the ethics. It's going to be inside the limits of the nature. So maybe it will help make these connections and these bridges and these interconnections. And the policy needs to go in this direction. Okay, I'm done. Yes, I had a problem with the connection here, but I think now it's better. Thank you very much, Rafael. Very clear your presentation, and I think that we are moving to many good ideas. Now I'll pass the floor to Adriana so we could look at this perspective of international cooperation in the Pan Amazon. So Adriana, the floor is yours. Welcome and thank you for having accepted the invitation. Thank you very much, Tatiana. I thank you to participate in this round of conversations with so many good experiences. It's a huge pleasure to share our experience with you, along with Miguel, Lucia, and Rafael. Miguel, I have a very interesting story to tell because once I was trying to organize a dinner of an event that we carried out. I was in the World Bank at the time in Lima, and we were recommended a person that was working in a Gaston Acurio restaurant, and this person was Virgilio. And I met him in 2007, 2008. And then Virgilio became one of the greatest disclosures of Amazon biodiversity in his main restaurant. He didn't have the restaurant at the time. That is considered one of the best restaurants in the world in the Peruvian gastronomy. Spectacular restaurants. And in this restaurant, they develop research. They seek new species and they research and they work with a lot of new opportunities that you and Lucia mentioned, and Rafael just mentioned about the bioprospection. So this story is very rewarding to me, and it's good to introduce the aspects of the importance of a new level in our discussion of international cooperation and the donations and the fundings that we work basically with donations in this area of biodiversity in the Amazon. Currently, I am in the GEF, but I used to work for the World Bank, and we had the opportunity to carry out projects in all the countries of the Amazon basin, in Peru, in Brazil, and in many other countries, many relevant projects. More recently, I wanted to highlight the importance of the sustainable landscapes. It is ASL, Amazon Sustainable Landscape, and this is funded by the GEF, the Global Fund for Environment, with the objective to protect the Amazon biodiversity and to promote policies of sustainable use of the land and restoration of the Amazon coverage. This program has an interesting and relevant program to our debate. because it brings this Pan-Amazon view of this table to work with the initial phase that started in 2015, and we worked with Peru, Colombia, and Brazil. And now, more recently, what we call the GF7 cycle, we joined with Ecuador, Bolivia, Suriname, and Guyana. So this program has an important platform of exchange of knowledge and network performance, network operation in many levels. Since the level of the work with the communities and indigenous populations, I thought it was very important, something that Miguel brought about a work in the level of small Amazon cities. This program has working with the municipalities, especially with the municipalities with high rates of deforestations in all these countries. In the state level, we have the pleasure to work with the governments of the state of Amazonas, and in the national level, but also in the global level, to bring a platform of donors to the region. Not only the multilateral funds as the GEF, but the IDB that works in this region, but the bilateral donors and the private foundations. I see these combinations as a powerful network to move these ideas forward. And the program has this base, but I also want to say, as my colleague Rafael said, some of my personal experience in these years of work with the Amazon about this work of seeking alternatives to the region. I think it is critical, and we had many good examples of innovative companies trying to find new markets and opening the region and opening for new products. And I see a good need of more engagement with this private sector.
In Jeff, we have a program, and I want to mention for the people who are watching us from the private sector area, we have a program focused in development of businesses with small and medium companies. It's called integrated finance, blended finances, where Jeff invests resources from donations or lending to work with these companies. In this area, we still don't have a great project in the Amazon, and I would like to have an invitation for you, for the people who want to talk with us about that. We have the resources, we just need good ideas to advance on that. And I would like to mention some important aspects that we need to connect these niche products, being gastronomy or cosmetic, with these elements or engines of degradation in the area. How can we integrate the agriculture and cattle, which are engines of degrading? How, with these opportunities of businesses and this exploration of these new areas and new products, I see the connection uh, with the production and widening with agroforest systems, which are integrated with local knowledge about some species. We have a wide experience with the work with that in the Brazilian Amazon mainly, but also in Peru and Colombia. These agroforest systems could be integrated in these chains. Every time I talk, especially with people from private sector, our friends from Natura and other companies, one of the bottlenecks that they have is the maintenance of the sustainable production for the demand of the market. Because we have so many chains based in extraction products, we have a real problem of production here. We can sometimes develop entire lines, as happened with Natura, that are fragile because of breaks in the production line. You don't have enough product to supply for the demand. This is a very important aspect for us to consider when we want to scale in bioeconomy. We have some products already. This is another point I want to make. In bioprospection, we develop the products and try new ideas. Then you see from these species, you start to create niches and markets and demand. But I want to focus on production. And I see a very relevant role for small Amazon towns as hubs for certain products. We have some organized markets in small towns in the Amazon around nuts or latex, more traditional products, açaí in Brazil or pirarucu, and how to invest in the verticalization of these chains on the return of this production for these small towns and communities and populations, and how to strengthen comparing to the engines of degradation and the chains that we talked about, the traditional agriculture and cattle, how to strengthen these chains that we call friends of the forest in large scale in the region. So I believe these projects that we mentioned and these initiatives are seeds, but we really need to work as Rafael and Tatiana put very well, in public policies that favor the integration of these products, the gain in scale and production, and the return to these populations that have the knowledge of these production chains. I see our role of these international organisms to finance, to support these initiatives in a Pan-Amazonic level and also in a local scale in these countries. So to wrap up, I would like to give you this challenge for our conversation. How can we scale this? How can we seek to develop hubs for businesses, incubators that talk with the local entrepreneurs? There's a lot of development, but there is a need to work in a local level with differentiated capacities. So we have to have a menu, we have to adapt the initiatives for the reality of different products. Another idea would be to select, to make a list, which are the greatest potentials and in what scale. Sometimes we see the açaí phenomena, it's huge, but you have other food products that will have a much smaller market and much more restrict market. And as Miguel gave very interesting examples, how can you add value through gastronomic tourism to these more restrict chains? We have the capacity to develop strategies for these different types of products and markets that we work here in the Amazon. But I see this as complementary with the greater range strategies, as this restoring of the agroforest systems as a great opportunity to advance in this agenda. I thank you, and I want to hear what you have to say and This is very nice. I'd like to continue here. Very good, Adriana. It's very interesting, adding to the multiple looks that Lucía said, but also the scaling. With a local and Pan-Amazonic organization, this is the greatest challenge. Now we have the debate. We have several questions from the chat. I will read 3 questions that we got here, and then we will make a round of conversations and reactions from you guys. The first question, and maybe Adriana already kind of answered, but we will listen from you. What are the challenges that should be faced in a group way from the countries in the Amazon to leverage businesses in the region? This is a good question. We have elements to talk about that. Second, what are the legal mechanisms of protection of traditional knowledges of sharing benefits that are in force in Peru? This is a question for the Peruvian colleagues here. And the third one, what are the ways the economic agents in the region should follow to promote the autonomy of the economic agents related to the bioeconomical chains and biodiversity? So now I'll open the debate. And Miguel, you wrote some very interesting things on the chat, and I would like to hear from you. Thank you. It's very interesting. Thank you, Rafael, Adriana, Lucía, for everything that you shared. This is very emotional for me. This is a passion. It's a great passion. It's very special. I would like to start by answering the question on how we scale things. The opportunity that we have to understand in this model of business is, as a producer, a chef connects to this, and they will ask, what else do you have? They don't focus on one product. If we depend on one product, the logistic will kill us with pricing and storage capacities and transports. This adding of ingredients generates an interesting volume to take us to competitive situations. We have many difficulties, especially in the economic basis. The air companies took all the money because we have to move a lot. And when we start to move 200 kilograms, this already generates a little difference in the scale and starts to move the economy. It's incredible. In dollars, for example, we had to pay $20 to send a taxi from the airport to pick up a product and to deliver to the restaurant for 1 kilo of product. It's the same cost that we would have for 200 kilos. So organizing the logistics is very important. In Peru and Latin America, we have to change the focus. First, what we do a lot is to copy what's on the market, coffee, cocoa, etc. We are not generating knowledge. We have to understand what the volumes and the services and logistics are that generate costs and can be interesting for us not to lose this value to the logistics and the producer end up not getting anything or very little. And second, when we talk about acai, for example, it's very interesting because it's a native product in biodiversity and started to generate monocultures, and this called for our attention. And as Lucía said, we have to have this structure of economy in places where acai is already produced naturally in great quantities. We have to have the airport close to the road, and for this we will have to deforest to produce close to the airport. In Brazil, they are building these areas for these uh, products to be flow through rivers, for example. In Latin America, we have this monoculture based system, and we have to treat the Amazon as a supermarket. How can we make it more dynamic, the, the model of business, to go through a supermarket where you have more than 1,000 products, but maybe changing this model of business logic based on, for example, nut. I have this nut, and it will produce only 2 to 3 months a year. And one tree over 1 hectare. How can we generate this presence throughout the year to avoid illegal poaching and extraction? But making this inventory of the forest is a key factor to make it more dynamic for the model of business. And we have satellite imaging, we have technology for this. The color of the coca leaf, each plant has a characteristic that we can, with technology and satellites, to define how to distribute the species and where they are, and to understand how they are being produced, what the volume is, what we can take from this volume without affecting fauna. It also feeds the biodiversity, animal-wise. The knowledge has to come from the Amazon to understand the flow. Biomass is very important, for an example. So it's not only protein, but amino acids as well. We have to have a study about that, because what we move around the world, not only such a plant or such fruit, is also the active, the asset, the industry. As Rafael said about the selenium, for example, we have to have a different study in muscle tissue, not only in the skin of these fruits and these species. We have to research. We have to have multidisciplinary work between the researchers.
Thank God this biology look allows me to understand this research, but the biologists don't understand this very much well. So how do we improve the formats of the research to talk about the variables that interest the competitive market? Thank you. Muito obrigado, Lucia. Thank you very much, Lucia, your comments. Well, he said everything that I was going to say. So thank you very much for this experience. So always share with us, because the people who were asking about how can we make a work in the Amazon with the Amazon countries, we start with this type of things. With this type of platform in which we exchange experience, and then we are going to realize that we have similar experience, not the same experience, but different, but all of them, there are Amazon experience that they can be replicated. Some of them can only show some learnings, even if they cannot be replicated in total. We are side by side. We share the biodiversity and ecosystems. So it is probable that we don't know all these experiences. So we have to respect national sovereignty, and we can start this exchange that are concrete and can give concrete results. When Adriana and Rafael talk about trust and scale, and we know that we are going through an electoral process very complex in our country. So this multiculturality in our countries, this is in our concern. So it's the moment to say that this trust is built necessarily listening to the others, and sometimes that doesn't happen. So we have to build trust in a formal way so we can leverage most of the opportunities that are happening in the commitments of the countries that are happening globally, and these they have to be done nationally so we could establish better public policies. For example, one of the opportunities that Peru is strongly committed to the fight against illegal deforestation. This is their national commitments with certain laws, and that can be in the development plans internationally developed. We have frameworks and tools to identify the potential of a territory. And Adriana gave an interesting example that ASL has an interesting project with projects that were independently at first. They could be considered independent, we can say that, but they decided to look at one another. And what they did was to exchange experiences, and one of them is the one that we use more now in Peru. So with this territorial look, it doesn't matter if there is a international cooperation helping in the territory. We have to harvest all the opportunities of public funds that are happening in these territories in order to add up. So in these territories of ASL in Peru, there is a place where we received international funds for support, but also was with new international funds generated capacities. So they applied innovation funds in Peru with different sectors, and with these funds that they could apply, they generate an innovation that was attractive to the private sector in the small scale. And they can sum to another scale. So with territorial looks, summing all the forces, recognizing all the financial resources, we can see how these synergies can join in order to improve what is being developed. And this is interesting for one of the questions that talks about the autonomy of the economic agents. I think that we can generate capacities and opportunities, but to put on the table that Miguel always talks about, all the players, so everyone can talk a little bit about what they know. So a very quick comment about the legal mechanisms. Peru has been working strongly with all the international commitments to make applicable rules, and we have to see how we are going to implement them. It is a very interesting thing. To me, it is strange because the Ministry of Culture of Peru joined with the Institute of Defense of Intellectual Property, the Ministry of Culture, and an institute that protects the intellectual property, and collectively they created a mechanism to protect the value of traditional knowledge and respecting the rights by formalizing them with an intellectual property of a collectivity. It is work that instrumentalizes the international norms, and it's a tangible work that is to generate a respect to intellectual property in the indigenous populations. So this is absolutely interesting, and I am here for now. I stop here for now. Thank you. A great example of the Ministry of Culture. There is an interesting arrangement of what we are used to. Now I'll pass the floor to Rafael for his comments and questions. Thank you, Tatiana. I'm going to make one comment about the first question. And I'm not going to talk anything about third question, about the economic agents, maybe later if we have time. But the topic of the first question, I wanted to highlight 3 details. The first is that there are many good ideas in the laboratory level, prototype level, in the schools in Brazil, in Colombia, Ecuador. In Guyana and Suriname, I'm not sure, but there are people doing things in a scale of 100 milliliters or half a liter, but there is nothing that can come out of the lab. So there is the first challenge of funding to skip from the lab to the market, not the market, but to make a test, a real test. So we need for the first 50 or $100,000. It is a barrier. I'm not talking about scale. I'm talking about leaving the lab. There is an important barrier. And we, as a bank, we are thinking about what type of funds we can take the products out of the lab and have a real prototype that can generate financing. And then continue with the scale. There are some products, not the direct food that comes out of the earth. When you want to transform biomass in something else, you need a refinery or investment of an important size. You can have public and private mechanisms, public alliances, but this is the classic challenge that everyone needs to convert to bioplastics that can change this plastic in Manaus, for example. And this is another classic challenge in the industry level. And we also have something that we are seeing very interesting is that some countries have strategies of bioprospection. But since with few resources, they apply 2 criteria to decide what species they are going to prospect. The endangered species that you know what's happening if you can protect them, and the ones that are close to value chain, for example, the acai that is already inserted in the value chain, that is captured and processed and distributed and commercialized. If from this discovery we found out an active agenda, it will be a huge potential to put this inside the value chain. But with the level of distributors, there is an opportunity. And then I wanted to talk about how to put this ancestor knowledge in the systems that we always mention, but I know very little about it. And the people who I talk to also know very little. For example, Peru has a conscious about this culture. We have a protocol in Nagoya in Japan that established the criteria or the agreements of equitable access to food. But many countries says, okay, 50-50, 50 to us and 50 to the company, or 60-40. However, in many different occasions, we don't have the real capacity to negotiate these agreements. It cannot be always 50-50. Depending on the value chain, there are many things. It's not the same thing as making a biofuels or a medication against cancer, for example. So the regime ABC, the idea is wonderful of ABS, but to put it very simple, I think this application can be complex, and the people who work in these institutions responsible for applying this ABS Many of them need help. So I think that I would call the attention for one point that needs to be strengthened. And I'll stop here. Wonderful, Rafael. There are some things growing. Now, Adriana. Thank you, Tatiana. Thank you, Lucía, for giving the example of AESL. It's good to hear this from a former minister. These ideas of knowledge and funding and exchange, we have to work through networks. And it's very good that I see that Peru values the approach of the program. The example that Rafael just gave, I always believed in a work that I say that it meets halfway. We have to work in the base with the communities, but we do need to work with the policies. We do have to work with the investments and to find in the middle ground this synergy. And even in the global mechanisms, as Rafael just talked about the ABS, inside Jeff, we have resources specifically marked to create capacities of regulation of ABS in the countries. And with broad space for knowledge exchange. So this is an area that we can advance even further, especially in a more modern regulation that takes into account all the specificities. And specifically in Amazon, this is extremely relevant. About the points, I think I already talked about the scale, but I want to go back a little bit in this issue of the relationship on how to stimulate and encourage the private sector. And people have to understand that the private sector is not only the big companies. Private sector is the small communities that create their own business, that have an entrepreneurship. We have to think, again, we have to meet halfway, to meet me in the middle. I always use this image. How do we do this? Miguel talks about logistics. Logistics is another in the rabbit. The logistics in the Amazon is a factor that we have to consider in any business plan for any product. The traditional products suffer with logistics, and we have a lot of pressure that we have in the region for opening new roadways, and we know that it's better for the forest to invest in multimodal transportation that use the river network that we have in the region. And the trend of the government is only thinking about roadways and only even railways. We have experiences in Brazil showing that railways have less impact in the forest than the roadways. We have to think about these multimodal transportations in a way that the logistics is something relevant.
And this relationship with the articulation in local level, but connecting with national policies and regional and global initiatives is key. This dialogue, and inside the program, one of the things that we really have been able to advance is that we were able to construct, to build a safe environment, a trust environment for frank dialogue between the countries, between national and subnational governments, with the representatives of civil society and with donors. So this building, just for you to have an idea, Lucía participated in some occasions, first to define the document that defines the program. It has been a collective construction. We took weeks meeting, we had a deadline with all the countries to define what are the components that will make, what are the pillars of the program. Let's work with protected areas and indigenous areas. These are the important areas of public domain. that are the capital for each country, is an asset for each country. The second pillar is about private lands and how will we integrate the actions in private lands to think about this landscape of production and protected landscapes, this integration in the landscape, the component of public policies, thinking about local policies, but also how can we harmonize in a larger level. What are the experiences we have from each country, how to integrate, how we learn from each other. And the third component is regional cooperation system, putting people together. Unfortunately, COVID somewhat separated us, but created an opportunity to connect virtually with more intensity. Something else that I can add is I see COVID as as opportunity in the international environment as a great opportunity for us to push this agenda of biodiversity and bioeconomy. In my years of experience, I have never seen so many articles in magazines, The Economist, and Financial Times, and other great vehicles of economics and talking about biodiversity. Last week, this work group, the task force has been established for financing of nature. It is directly involved in what is this task force? If we look at the portfolios, starting with central banks, the Dutch central bank has started already. What are the risks for the credit portfolios not to consider the impact in biodiversity? This can be a transformation that's going to be huge in relation to financing and support. And what Rafael said, how can we get this $100,000 to go from research to product? I see an opportunity now in this next decade that I didn't see the last decade. And this has this key factor of this mobilization on the global level in relation to COVID and how can we reconstruct in a more green and sustainable way. I see this as an opportunity, and in the Amazon, we have a lot of initiatives that are mature in a certain way to work in these different levels. We have to find a way to meet between and produce this synergy. Thank you. Thank you, Adriana. We are reaching the last 10 minutes of our panel. And to wrap up, I would like to have a last round, a quick round. And one of the questions of the forum is that we build some principles that guide what we call this innovation, investment in bioeconomy, the principle of decreasing these inequalities, the importance of science, technology, and innovation in all the scales of bioeconomy, and this principle of more standing forests. But we also have to build a principle of synergy, a pan-Amazonic synergy. This is always popping up. This is not new. We're not creating the wheel here. This Amazonic Landscapes project, for example, it's an attempt to create synergy. And I would like for you guys in this last round to talk about mechanisms or ideas in the short term that so we can leverage these process of synergy in all the fronts and scales and multidimensionalities in businesses in the Amazon. So Miguel, you're on. So take your chance also to say goodbye because this is the end. Thank you, Tatiana. I insist with what I learned in the gastronomics sector. When people get together to explore, we were the first Latin American chefs to to have a restaurant on a boat, and to have this uh, richness in how to grow in a sustainable development way. We have to create these spaces of collaboration and discussion. It's also very important for us to understand the logistics in the Amazon in this. We believe that the road will solve the businesses, but we really don't have all the grip that we should have in this river transportation system. So today now we'll see some companies that are entering and operating in the market in the last 20 years as essential with a new way of thinking and generating logistics. And I trust a lot what's going on. I travel to the Maranhão River and Amazon. They all have a Wi-Fi signal, and I think it works for better opportunities to arise. Communication is very important. In Peru, we're starting to build a platform for rural building, which are key elements in the Peruvian community. These private companies are acting in the systematization for the people who are close to the families and advising families are not connected with the great ventures, people who organize information to establish this trust, but also to understand in Peru and Latin America, we can see in the next years, these bad thoughts of not building chains, not only to leave the poverty, but to establish a market. It's very interesting how the world works in this way, in this adequate way of verticalization of the markets. But we have to think of only putting the money, because the weakest part we need to have a middleman. And to have successful situations will generate other opportunities in this sustainable economic ideas, but not only for the most poor ones, but we have to think of a way to strengthen and to feed these projects of intermediary chains that not necessarily are bad, but sometimes the economic studies we see that is taking a large part of the market, but they don't have a critical way. They have loan sharks that are extorting people. It's horrible in the daily situation. They're not generating platforms that can integrate this situation. We need to create a group for the government of the Amazon, translating the research in a larger aspect in the articulated communities, in the diversity. We have to try to focus on a model of business based on supermarket to have these products in only one place. In this model of business, it's not a monoculture system. What should guide us in volume of production and in better prices, this is the way. We need to understand these models from the models developed from diverse markets, supermarkets and restaurants. This is where I learned. In one dish, you see diversity and connections, how everything articulates, all this logistics is articulated in one dish. This is very emotional, but it also is a touristic issue. We have to put them together with this financing operations as well. How can we have a tourist for 1 week here in the forest? But the answer is very simple. Because we don't have beaches like Costa Rica, we have several resources that have not been transformed in tourist products. The possibility of bathing in the biggest waterfall in the world, we have several issues here. The sound of the Amazon rain is sold at Amazon for $1. We have to go back to our roots. What made us special? What did we like before? We can find market in that. Everybody knows that the sound of the rain will make us sleep in 1 second. These things on how to be creative and how to share information, this diversity and articulating the market for everybody to have a healthy operation. We need to have these translators as we are doing the translation here in the forum. We have to have translators for the market. Somebody has to mold it to the way the market wants and to make for everybody to make this translation for the society and the communities. We know what to do. The how is the issue. This is a historic moment for the bicentennial we have here in Peru to build, to deepen these key issues for the tropical models. For Latin America to create these new ways of economic focus, I think it's very important for the whole world and also for us. Thank you. Excellent, Miguel. This is a moment that we need hope, right, Lucia? Yes, the truth is,
Listening to Miguel is very inspiring because we are not talking only about technological things. We are talking about the diversity of thinking, the thinking outside the box, because technology is here. We have to open your minds to it. And he talked about the greatest issue of the day. How are we going to do it? How are we going to instrumentalize this? New ideas, new norms, new rules, new policies, but how to act on what we have to propose immediately. Tatiana, can I go on what you said initially in this last round in the guiding principles? Besides the synergies, I think it is a transversal thing, a crossing thing. We have to highlight that the synergy is something that crosses borders. Not only depend Amazon, but it is very important that this concept of guiding principle of the economy talks about synergies among different actors in the insides of the country, and then we could scale this in the Pan Amazon. I think this is very interesting. When you talk about the principle of conservation of biodiversity, it is so important that this conservation of biodiversity is understood as the sustainable use based on the knowledge because many biodiversity topics in this perception of those who receive the message is that we cannot conduct it, and these old model that we have protected areas now. If we want to harvest the populations, they used to say, no, we cannot do this. So the preservation of biodiversity as a guiding principle has to be very clear, is that is for the sustainable use, and for that you have to know it. We cannot use this biodiversity for economic chains without getting to know them, without knowing what you can propose from that. I just wanted to stay with this issue of science and technology for sustainable use and a social biodiversity. That was the second guiding principle. I didn't mention in the previous meeting, but that possibility of accessing science and technology for beyond the traditional knowledge, I don't know if this was mentioned some point. There is a two-way paths. The academic sector, I think that the possibilities that the state puts for the private sector in Peru, according to the examples that I mentioned, what the government did was to create center in research and technology in the regions. So they have cities. So where you are in the potential in the territory, from these points you have a research center, and you can go there and say if your idea can be worked on and supported. There is an upgrade. If you reach this place, you can find some synergy with someone with a similar idea that can generate better opportunities. So this sensation of technology towards the sustainable use of biodiversity, that is another guiding principle of the economy. We have the state with an interesting role to give solidity to all this. And I'm sorry, I want to talk about the third principle. What happens is that we do need to be in a moment that if we are not the focus and leave these gaps and these services for the population, and what we are saying, expecting and dreaming cannot be fulfilled, because it will not be only a logistic thing, but basically this is a lack of services. The whole chain can be turned down for that. So this is an excellent idea. It will stay wherever they were born. I'm sorry that I ran over the time, but it is a challenge to have a recovery that needs to be green and respects the potentialities and the biodiversities of the country. I'm sorry to say that, but since I don't think that the pandemic, that we have to close the nature, and the nature is back because there was an animal inside a church in Italy. Here in Peru, the illegal mining grew, the illegal deforestation grew in this period. There are beautiful pictures of the nature in Peru, but that's not the reality. There are many countries in Latin America, from the Amazon, that we need an economic recovery, that we need to be very careful so it doesn't affect what we are saying today here. This can only be achieved with this type of forum, this type of space. I'm sorry to say that again, but only talking about the potentiality that are in the countries, and in the countries we can recover from this. And we cannot turn down half of Amazon to do that. We can do this with renewable energies, with multimodal transportations. We don't need only to use one train or a roadway for this. So we have to value everything that we have in the standing forest, and the investments are not directly directed to the center of innovation and technology in the region. And I think that we can use, and we can talk about the generalized use of the timber and some technology centers, what Miguel was saying. Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for extending myself here. So thank you for the opportunity that you have given me to learn from you today. I think this is a commitment to us. Adriana, your final words, and then Rafael. I just wanted to thank the opportunity. I know that it is incredible. I really like to be in this round of conversation because I can see how passionate we are for this topic, for the Amazon, and for biodiversity. And offer, I think Lucía and Miguel said, I think we need to continue in this synergy. But at Jeff, we are at your disposal. We have financing in all these areas. We were working with the countries, and I will be happy to talk to the people and to be with them individually. And this is what we do. We build capacities, we seek synergies, and pushing all this with a lot of passion. Because we know that what comes from the other side is very strong, but we can do it. All the trajectories here are of people who are making the difference. Thank you very much to be part of this panel. Congratulations on the initiatives, and we will be together. Thank you. Thank you, Rafael. Now it's yours. Thank you, Tatiana. I'm going to speak in Portuguese now. I apologize to the assistants who don't speak if I'm not very clear. Very quick, two things to your question. First, last year, the Leticia-backed countries asked the help of the bank, and we created an initiative called Sustainable Amazon with 4 priorities. One of them is bioeconomy. So the bank is going to invest in many resources of loan and technical cooperation to support initiatives for the Pan-Amazon countries. The second idea, in the short run, that we are working in a very early phase. We are working on creating a network of many research centers and development that are focused on the biodiversity, so they can elect 2 activities. The first is to strengthen the activity, to strengthen the initiatives, to seek synergies. If 10 centers are going to have bioprospection, it doesn't make sense if 10 of them have the same work with the same species, but they can seek different combinations that are making more sense. And so they can exchange knowledge and initiatives. And to strengthen the ideas of bioprospection, so the society can appreciate the value of these species, and the companies can identify opportunities of business around this biodiversity. These are the things that I could share with you. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you. Now we are going to close this panel. Wonderful ideas especially for the boats here. My team might be very nervous right now with this idea, but I want to remind you that the videos will be recorded, will be available. We are going to put the subtitles in English and in Spanish because it's a very important talk, so we can disclose it. Will be available in the website. And in the afternoon, we have a specific panel about education and human resources in bioeconomy, bringing a discussion in this aspect. And we are going to have a panel in which our representative of Bolivia will talk about the Brazilian nut. So we have a synergy with Bolivia to strengthen these networks. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope we can continue in contact and have a wonderful. Thank you very much.